Hi everyone, Bethany here, your clean eating coach. Today we're going to talk about recipes and how recipes themselves can be an obstacle in our clean eating journey. So, how can recipes themselves be an obstacle? One of the biggest reasons I see is that they're not usually completely accurate. Cooking is a science, but it's varying depending on elevation, it depends on your oven, it depends on your taste buds. You know the recipes that will say salt to taste? I used to hate recipes that said that. And I still kind of hate them, but I'm learning to actually understand the actual tasting process in my food and knowing like if this feels like enough salt or not. So I'm growing in that area and I challenge you to try it as well. But that can be tricky. When somebody's made a recipe, they've made it because they like it that way with certain spices, certain levels of salt, etc. And everyone's taste buds are different. So you might find that you need to modify a recipe based on what you want. You might find that the recipe is kind of bland and needs more salt or more spices in this or that capacity. I'm regularly making dishes and then my husband says, ooh, we should add this or we should add that. And it can annoy me sometimes, but he's usually right. The flavor needs a little bit of help. So if anymore, I've started to, as I'm cooking a dish, say, hey, honey, come in and check it out. And he tastes a spoonful and then he lets me know what he thinks. And I'm also learning to train my taste buds. Another area that recipes can really be an obstacle is the amount of time they say it takes to accomplish a task. Have you been there? So the recipe will say, this is done in 20 minutes. Yes, it's done in 20 minutes if you've made it like at least 3 times, you know what's in the recipe, you know how to chop everything, and you're a pro at it. It never takes as long as the recipe says. I usually anticipate it's gonna take at least 3 times as long, depending on if I'm already familiar with the skills the recipe calls for. So keep that in mind when you're trying a new recipe. Give yourself grace to be a beginner and know that it's a project. It's going to take some time. Not only do you have to make sure you have all the ingredients, then you have to measure out all the ingredients. If you have vegetables or any type of item that needs more than just a can being opened, you have to make sure you know how to chop the vegetable, chop the item, prepare it. If it's grinding garlic or ginger, that can take a while. I'm not very good at that. That's something I'm growing in. And so these are all the components to remember that when you pull up a recipe and you feel so hopeful, remember, this is your first time making it. Unless you're very familiar with the process of, say, cooking pasta or rice or whatever the piece is that you're already really good at, it's going to take longer. You also have to give buffer time for just making mistakes, like maybe something burned and you have to cook it again. Maybe you put in too much of a certain spice and it's just a no-go. That happens sometimes, so give yourself the space and grace to make those mistakes. So kind of like in a previous video, like perfection cannot be the goal here. If you expect perfection from yourself, you're going to stop cooking because recipes involve making lots of mistakes. But the more you make those mistakes, well, the more you try, the less mistakes you're going to make. And then it'll become more fluid and more natural. I have a friend who doesn't use any recipes. She knows all of them in her head. She knows in general what kinds of proportions of spices to put in certain dishes. And I'm not there yet, but I'm hoping to get there and I'm growing in that direction. But ultimately, just don't let recipes become your enemy. They're here to help you, but let them be imperfect as they are. Except that they're not going to be the golden standard. They're not always going to get it right. And good cooking involves really knowing technique, and a lot of recipes don't teach you that. So I highly recommend that you Google recipes, but then you also look at YouTube videos for how to chop up the eggplant, how to prepare roasted vegetables. Track a variety of sources, and as you do that and you hear from different people, you'll have a much better idea of how to effectively use the recipes well, so they won't be the hindrance, but they'll be a support in your journey toward clean eating. All right, I'd love to hear your comments on this episode and what you do, how recipes have helped or hurt you in the past. Like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to meet all the people in your life and help them out on their clean eating journey as well. So you guys take care and happy eating.